It's the afternoon of January 27th, 2009. I'm Aron, acting news director of NJN News. We are at the Eagleton Institute of Politics for the Rutgers program on the governor, specifically the Thomas H. Kane Archive. We're going to continue our interview with Cary Edwards this afternoon. We had a session with Cary before. Cary was chief counsel to Tom Kane during the first term. He became Attorney General in the second term. We're going to talk about the re-election, 1985 campaign, and look at the second term and his role as Attorney General. Tom Kane easily beat Peter Shapiro in the gubernatorial race of 1985. Why?
An incredibly successful 4 years as governor, or 3.5 years prior to that. The list of accomplishments that I think touched every constituency in the state of New Jersey. As chaotic as it looked in the beginning of the Kane administration, to the outside, we kind of knew, us, the people on the inside kind of had an idea of how we wanted to do this. We didn't know if we could mechanically accomplish it or communicate it. But terrific set of accomplishments and a great communication plan that was put together, I think, by Greg Stevens and Bob Grady and Carl Golden to communicate to the public and the constituencies of the state of New Jersey who we were and what we were doing. The governor, I think I mentioned this before, relinquishing a little bit of his manic control of his own image in the beginning, I think was a very, very important move, which the Greg Stevens and the Bob Gradys and the Carl Goldens were able to successfully put together. A terrific team. And on the inside, and the government side, that was my responsibility. Gary Stein, some very, very talented cabinet people that he had put together. The Saul Coopermans in education, the Bob Hueys, George Albanese in human services, some holdovers, the Falvers in correction. We were prison overcrowding was a major problem. The list just goes on. It was a coming together of a lot of very talented people and a governor who was willing to let those talented people clearly not only participate, but lead their respective areas. And he listened to them and was not afraid to make the decisions that were there.
How did you balance your role as counsel with the demands of getting him reelected?
I don't think as counsel on my side of the table we worried as much about that on a specific basis. We were worried about the government side. When he went out to run, when the actual campaign was put together in '85, I was left behind to kind of run government, while various other members of the staff worked on the mechanics of the campaign, the Greg Stevens and the Gradys, and so that I always focused much more on the government programmatic side, clearly understanding the constituencies that we were serving and balancing and trying to take care of the whole state. But and we had a Democratic legislature that was literally a worthy adversary, I think, during that period that we managed to reach significant accommodations with. We had 450 programs in the first 4 years. We needed legislation passed, for instance. We passed 430. Now, did we get everything we wanted in every bill? No. But did we get everything that should be in every bill? Probably, because what we wanted was not the only answers. We were perfectly willing to accept good programs from wherever they came from. I find that ironic today, listening to the Obama formula for how he would like to be president. And I thought about this as I was watching the inauguration all day and the days before that. We actually did that. We created a bipartisan governmental structure during that period that was very successful, because the governor was absolutely willing to share credit and ideas and accept ideas from wherever they came from, as opposed to just being partisan. And as I think I said before also, he wasn't as controlled by the Republican Party machinery as he was, as most governors who come into office, because they never supported him originally. So the combination of those things all came together in what I think was a terrific set of programs. We did, in just about every area. We had a major recession on our hands, 21% interest. Reagan had just become president, not unlike today. We had a democratically controlled legislature, significant budget deficits, prison overcrowding, water shortages and droughts during that particular period, a disorganized government, one that had not had any investments in it, its structure, I'm talking about its capital structure for a long time, buildings collapsing. Trenton was not as great a city or as good as it could have been. So we set about with a very broad campaign across all constituencies and areas of the state and started to move on them very systematically for the next 3 years. And then, so we dealt with the water shortages issue. So we built reservoirs. We dealt with prison overcrowding. We had, with both programs and facilities that we were able to build. We took the surpluses of dollars we had during those first 4 years, didn't put them into ongoing responsibilities, but we fixed the capital infrastructure, whether it was open spaces, reservoirs, prisons, fixing our colleges and institutions, our buildings, starting to rebuild Trenton. We did the State House renovation, if you remember, during that period of time. Legislature moved over to the annex. Significant investments in education. Saul Cooperman's activities in our educational programs were, I think, second to none. We put college autonomy together. That was one of the ones we didn't pass until '86, but I was busy training for a year the college presidents on how to lobby what college autonomy really meant. We had dioxin problems, asbestos problems that we had to deal with during that particular period. Financing of our infrastructure, whether we proposed an infrastructure bank, we compromised and settled on the Transportation Trust Fund, which still exists today, which was novel in the country at the time. The Environmental Infrastructure Bank, which was wastewater treatment, was put together, which has been servicing the state now for 30 years almost. Our transportation network, we took over Conrail. We built NJ Transit, the fundamentals of NJ Transit that are there today. Tom Ken and I are both part of the NJ Transit Hall of Fame for different reasons. Me for getting back when I was in the legislature, him for his efforts to make NJ Transit and our state transportation system, mass transit system, a working reality. That goes through area after area of problems that we faced that had been neglected for a very long time. And ironically, the bipartisan character of the government at that time that Tom Kean absolutely put together, understood, was primarily with the legislature, that partnership with the Democrats, and we fought heavily on a lot of issues, created better government, much better government than we've had in any of our partisan areas or single partisan ones.
In essence, you're saying that a lot of things were neglected during the 8 years of the Byrne administration.
Not neglected. That would be unfair. I think it'd be unfair to Brendan. Brendan came along at a point in time, a major transition point in how government was structured. The power of the legislature, independent power of the legislature, raising its head, him having to deal with that. Economic issues that were, the income tax issue itself was monumental. Brendan had incredible insight into serious problems the state faced and had the intestinal fortitude to attack them. Whether it was the income tax, Pinelands, some really, really tough issues. In doing that, you only have so much political capital, even if it's your own party that you're involved in. And so he didn't have either the resources nor the political capital that he was spending on very, very important issues that have also shaped the future of the state. So it would be unfair to blame Brendan for that. That was a consequence of, I think, the periods of time that he faced. They therefore became problems we had to deal with. He dealt with 3 Mile Island, for instance, and the whole growth of our emergency preparedness capacity that is second to none. State Police, I understand, just found the jet engine that fell in the Hudson River. That's part of that capacity that he created at that point in time that we benefited from during this period of time. We helped fund that. We doubled the size of State Police. And we doubled the physical plant of the State Police so they were more able to respond. So we took the problems we were faced with and really stood on the shoulders of some pretty good governors, I think, that preceded him. And I'll go back to Dick Hughes, Bill Cahill, Brendan Byrne. They were good governors. They all dealt with issues that moved this state forward. And I think we stood on their shoulders and tackled the problems, and the governor did tackle the problems that were there very successfully. I think as successful as any governor has ever dealt with this state.
So good government is good politics.
Always. And you need to be able to communicate it. And good government is very rarely just one philosophical side. It's not one person's idea. It is the collective idea with good leadership. And Tom Kean gave good leadership and was perfectly willing to share the stage with good ideas coming from wherever they came from.
Who was Peter Shapiro?
Who was Peter?
Who was Peter?
Well, Peter Shapiro was a bright legislator, served with me in the legislature, very committed to public service, very, I think, ambitious also in the political sense, and that's not bad. It's not a bad thing. And his ideas and concepts and where he wanted to take both Essex County and New Jersey were beyond his skill to produce it, I think, if I had to put it in a category. Committed.
Did the public know that? Is that why the public rejected him?
No, I think the public rejected him because Tom Kean was as good as Tom Kean was. He came up against a very formidable adversary, I think, in that race. It was bad timing and judgment on his part. And he was having significant problems in Essex County, running Essex County, which showed up later. And I think those were highlighted during the campaign. And it was hard to beat a Tom Kean during that period. Our work, whether it was on our cities, our inner cities, the school systems, Tom Kean's knowledge of the urban problems and our aggressively attacking those, I think we wound up winning every constituency. He won every town in the state, I think, except Franklin Township.
He won, I think, 70% to 30%, which I think was the largest margin in gubernatorial history.
But he won it across constituencies. He won it in the African American community, he won it in the Jewish community. These were Democratic constituencies.
In hindsight, should the Democrats have nominated someone else, Jim Florio again, Alan Karcher? No? Peter Shapiro was as strong as they could have come up with?
I don't think it mattered. I don't think it mattered. I think the first term of the Kean years was so successful that I don't think anyone they put up was going to beat him.
You started in a recession, but times were good by the mid-'80s nationally. Was that part of the equation
They were
too?
growing now. They weren't great during. They were better, but there was still the debate on the national income tax change that didn't pass until 85, 86. The consequences to the recession were very significant. We in New Jersey were doing very well, but I think we in New Jersey were doing well not by accident. We made judgments on taxes. The New Jersey New Perfect Together program, our promotion of the state, those are part of those successes I was talking about. That when you put them all together, we were just hitting on all cylinders, on all issues, almost across the board.
Was Tom Kean a different candidate in '85 than he had been in '81?
Yes.
How so?
Better, more focused, had the same. It was the same Tom Kean who would still stop and talk to whoever grabbed him about an issue. He was just better on message, understood the role of governor, what he was doing, understood it very well, a lot better than he understood the role itself, even when he was running the first time. I think he had a much more experienced staff and campaign. He was also running with more money, more capacity than he had had before.
Doesn't 4 years in office also grow a man
Absolutely.
greatly?
And he grew great, as all governors have. He grew significantly in those years. As Brendan grew, I think, from the time Brendan started going into the second term, and he grew significantly. And he was starting with what was a good base. He had a good understanding of New Jersey, its constituencies. He had been in public life a very long time, and his family had been in public life a very long time. His focus on this state and its issues and understanding its people was far deeper than most people would realize a public official would have. And then there are others who've had the same length, but he went back campaigning for his father when his father was running for the Senate and beat by Pete Williams, if you want to take it back. The irony of the family's commitment to public service hasn't changed. Look at his son. Today, Tom Kean Jr. Tom Kean Jr. began working in a congressional office. This is his own desire, this isn't family forced, or this is just what he wants to do. Tom had that same background. And Tom was an educator and a student of government and a student of this state, and he understood it. The more experience he got as an executive, which he had not had before, was, I think, the difference between the beginning of the campaign and this one. He had been a legislator, policymaker. He was really understanding the executive branch and what it meant to run the government, which I don't think he understood as well when he started.
You're painting a picture of the ideal man to be governor of this state.
Absolutely. He was. At that point in time, he was the ideal person. And he just grew through that job. We did a recent, his skill, I think, that he's gained in those years. There was a piece that was put together by a group of people about Tom's handling of the 9/11 Commission and the skill with which he handled that commission, which had executive problems, but constituency and legislative support in order to make the accomplishments a success. And I know because I did a bunch of taping on there, and Greg Stevens did, and a lot of people who were involved with Tom as to how he accomplished what he did with the 9/11 Commission. It was, some of that, if anybody would take a look at it, demonstrates the kind of skills that he built over his career. The significant part of that was as governor. But he took the legislative piece he had. He took the understanding of the executive piece. Because he was appointed by the executive. And the problems he was dealing with were executive problems. And he implemented them. I mean, think about the skill that it took to get in that environment, that 9/11 Commission's recommendations done and implemented. That's just the maturation of Tom Kean.
I've observed a lot of governors' offices in my time, and you said that he was out campaigning and you were back in the office running the government, and
really watching it, I don't know.
Were you sort of a surrogate governor? You certainly were prominent on the budget in those 4 years. You presented the budget to the public personally, in a way that not many of your successors have, or that maybe the state treasurer has assumed that role, not the chief counsel. Did you see yourself as a kind of deputy governor, surrogate governor?
No, I saw myself as a lawyer who had one client who was a governor, and my capacity to know that client's interests, what they want to accomplish, and then to use my skill to help get what they wanted done accomplished. That's what I saw my role as. And I got to know him intuitively, my personality combined with his. I got to know what he would do without him having to tell me. It was, I could be forced into a problem before an audience or a speech in Atlantic City when I'm debating Alan Karcher, and I've got to take a position on some issue, and he's taking the same position the day before up in North Jersey someplace. Identical. That was my skill in understanding him, or trying to. And so my job, I saw it as representing his interest and trying to further the broad spectrum of his needs, both governmentally and politically and personally, and not misrepresent them or allow them to be misrepresented in that world.
We're having this chat in 2009, the year that New Jersey is going to elect its first lieutenant governor.
Correct.
What do you think of that change?
Well, I think we need a lieutenant governor. I really do. There have been far too many instances we've seen in the past, but I believe that for 20 years. That's not a new issue. In the event something happens to a governor in the state, we need someone who's prepared, who's part of that same administration, who's prepared to step in and take over.
Senate presidents haven't served us well stepping in?
Some better than others, but with tremendous upheaval when they've done it. They're separate and independent entities, and you don't know who they're going to be in that process. The idea is the governor was elected and is moving in a certain direction with a program. They need somebody, if something happens to them, to keep that program going. So they don't need an adversary. They don't need a new figure in the game. They need a new person with the same program or an idea of the same program. Lieutenant governor from the same party running with as a vice president does. We've been very well served nationally by vice presidents, I think, in reality. Whether it's the Fords or the Trumans and historically, Lyndon Johnson. I think they've continued the fundamental programs that their administration was a part of. Lyndon Johnson and Kennedy were probably more at odds than any other, but the idea is to get a team together so that if something does happen to the governor is so important in this state, so powerful, as is the Chief Justice, as is the President of the Senate, as is the Speaker. There's a balance of power that exists there. To have the Senate President step in skews that balance terribly. So I've been a long-term big supporter of lieutenant governors. And what has happened is, I think, to an extent you're right, the governor's staff has wound up being sometimes that alter ego. And a new governor comes in and they get pushed aside to some degree, and it all gets lost. That doesn't happen, I think, in other circumstances.
When did Kane ask you to be Attorney General?
I had announced nobody's ever been counsel for 4 years to the governor. And I knew why coming up about June of my 3.5 years when I made a presentation to the Senate Joint Appropriations Committee, said I'm out of here as soon as the election's over. And I thanked them for their 4 years.
You announced publicly that you were going to leave the administration?
Yes.
Had you told Kane?
Yes. Yeah, I told him. He knew I was planning to leave.
To do what?
I'll go back to private practice. I had no particular goal in mind, but I knew I was very tired, very tired. I knew why people didn't stay there for 4 years. The job is as big a burnout job as I've ever. It's almost impossible to describe. For me, it was an 18, 20-hour day every day,
Plus
7 days a week.
In Oakland,
and I traveled
Bergen
every
County.
day. I slept 4 hours a day. It was brutal.
Can a person do a good job keeping that pace?
You can, but there's a cost you pay. My hair went gray. I think I probably had bypass surgery later on. A lot of things you don't do. Your family disappears. It was the greatest job I ever had, and the most grueling job and punishing job I ever had. I was very tired at the end of the budget in June of '85, and I thanked Larry Weiss and the Appropriations Committee, because I believe we did a lot, we created the OMB during that period, new budgeting process, very significant things, most of which have been abandoned now, I'm sorry to say, but really good budgeting practices that were in place. The governor was in control of the budget, not bureaucrats. The governor's office was. His budget was consistent with his programs. We put resources where his programs were. And I thank the legislature for their partnership that we had in that period of history. In August of that year, I had maybe one vacation, I think, in the 3.5 years I was there. My staff got together and sent Lynn and I to Hawaii for 10 days in August of election year. That shows you how important the governor's office is in the middle of a gubernatorial election. And it was one of the nicest things that anybody ever did. But they knew I was burned out. They knew I needed to get away. And I had put off my vacations, particularly I had never been to Hawaii at that point. So it's a very quiet time from the time the budget is passed until after the election in June. And so Tom knew, and I was very tired, very willing to sit around and work out and deal with the issues of government. They were very easy for me at that point in time. There wasn't a lot of activity. Everybody was more worried about the campaigns, other than the collapse of motor vehicles, which he had asked me to write a plan to reform motor vehicles, which I finished, I guess it was October 1st, and plenty of time for him to announce it as part of his campaign, and he opted not to announce it. He said, I find that, and I agreed with him, by the way. He thought that was insincere and would be perceived as being some trumped-up solution just for election purposes, and not a sincere effort to reform the agency.
How had it collapsed?
Well, we had Cliff Snedeker was the director of the Division of Motor Vehicles. He had commissioned Price Waterhouse to design a new computer system that took 2.5 years to build. And around the end of May, beginning of June, they turned the new computer system on, and they lost every record in motor vehicles. And the function of motor vehicles, which didn't have a great track record anyway, absolutely collapsed. You had a driver's license, but you're the only one that knew you had a driver's license. And they had not built any backup systems to restart the old one. And the agency was in significant disarray. It's the one person, I think publicly, that Tom ever asked to resign from office and asked him to step down was Cliff Snedeker as Director of Motor Vehicles. It's a division in the Attorney General's office, if you recall. And he went out, and as we said, we screwed up. We made a mistake. We weren't paying attention. And I'm going to ask Cary Edwards to design a plan to fix it. And he left the press conference. So I spent the next 3 months doing that, and gave it to him around the end of September, beginning of October. So he would have it for the campaign if he wanted it. He opted not to release it for the reasons I just stated. He thought it would be perceived as being insincere, and that's an important thing for him. His credibility, his honesty, his perception of that is he believes is important, and it is. And so I kept it, and about 2 weeks after the election, I guess he asked me if I was be interested in fixing one of the agencies that we had not paid as much attention to as we should have, the Department of Law and Public Safety, the Attorney General.
When was this? When did he do this?
2 weeks after the election.
After the election?
After the election. He said, would I be interested in being Attorney General? And
where were you? Were you in the office?
I was in the office. Our office, I had that little office right next to, in the inside office, I was that little one that connected. So we were just having a chat one day, and he said, would you be interested in being Attorney General? And I think it took me about a day or so to think about it, talk to Lynn, because I was planning I hadn't even looked for a job at that point. I hadn't done anything. I didn't know where I was going. And I said, we had really not done well with reference to the Department of Law and Public Safety for a lot of reasons.
Your Attorney General had been Kimmelman. Was there another one, or
no,
just Kimmelman? Okay.
We had made no major arrests. There were major disconnects between the criminal justice system and the state police, and motor vehicles had collapsed. The Athletic Commission had problems. There was a number of problems in law and public safety. Mike Cole and I, as counsel, were trying to fix some of those towards the end, that last year. So I said it's one of the unfinished jobs, I think, of the administration was the issues that law and public safety deal with that we hadn't addressed in the first term.
So he asked you to be his Attorney General, and you took a day or so.
Day or so, yeah.
And why did you decide to say yes?
I was incredibly curious to ascertain what it would be like to actually run an agency. You get wrapped up in the governor's office in the big picture, in administering the whole system, the budget, legislative policy. I was watching bills get adopted, and I had been for a long time, watching them not get why didn't they work? What happened to them between the time we passed these scathingly brilliant ideas and they get implemented? Why don't they get implemented well? Is there something wrong with the people who work in government? Does it work? What's it like to try to deal with the other side of that coin? And I was incredibly curious about it. I also thought we had neglected, it was an unfinished little check on my agenda of the broader pictures in government, that we had not done that well.
Isn't it also the greatest lawyer job in the state of New Jersey?
Yeah, not really. I had the greatest lawyer job in the state of New Jersey. Counsel. Attorney General's an administrative job. And it was easy.
Really?
Easy. It's the easiest job I ever had in my life.
You would think just the opposite. You look at an organization chart of state government, there are 11 divisions in law and public safety.
Not when you come out of the counsel's office.
9,000 employees underneath you.
Easy. For me, I'm telling you, the easiest job I had, the most fun in my years in government was Attorney General. If I could have stayed another 3 years, I never would have run for governor. I just didn't finish what I wanted to do.
What was so fun about it?
It did have that. It had a bully pulpit platform. You could pick and choose what you wanted to do, issues you wanted to attack. You had the public standing as Attorney General to move those issues forward if you wanted. You could do good lawyering. You could pick cases and argue cases before the Supreme Court if you wanted to. You had 10 divisions. You had 9,000 people, one of the largest budgets in state government. You enforced the administration's policy consistently across all departments. You could reach into any issue in state government.
What issues did you grab?
Well, a bunch of them. I had to fix motor vehicles. One of the problems, one of the great ironies of my life was, in government you have people that plan and give you solutions to problems. Then you hire people to implement them. And if they don't work, the implementers blame the planners, and the planners blame the implementer. I had planned to fix the motor vehicles. I had to do it right. And motor vehicles needed to be fixed. And it was a prime test for me as to whether or not government could deliver good service for fees it was being paid for. And I wanted to see if you could do it. And I had written a plan to do that, and I wanted to implement that. And we did. That's one of the ones I chose. The criminal justice issue, we hadn't had an organized crime or significant arrest in 4 years. At the time, Buddy Fortunato was on trial for having sold jobs on the Parkway, Turnpike.
He was an assemblyman.
Right. The jury came in 4 days after I was sworn in. 20 minutes it had been out, acquitted. Bad case. We're making terrible cases. Our criminal justice system, there was a big kind of turmoil about 2 years into our administration in which Steer and a bunch of the senior criminal justice lawyers walked out because the decision had been made by the then Attorney General to turn the responsibilities for law enforcement more over to the state police. The state police believed they make the cases, they give the file to the lawyers who prosecute the cases, but they don't participate in the investigations. Our system wasn't working that way. U.S. attorney system doesn't work that way. It's a joint effort. And the abdication of that, or Irwin's decision to give it to the state police the way they wanted it, all the senior people in the state police in the criminal justice division left. They didn't make a good case during that period. And Irwin was wrong, and Clint Pagano was wrong. That needed fixing. When I got there, I had a great first assistant who was head of criminal justice by the name of Don Belsall, And I reversed that system. And about a dozen of those very experienced criminal justice prosecutors and investigators came back. We made some scathingly great cases during those 4 years because they were really good at what they did. We made the Scarfo case. We turned the major witness in the Scarfo prosecution that the feds prosecuted.
Nicky Scarfo, mob boss.
Mob boss. We made the, you remember when the bridge burned down in on 78 because a group of crooks had put some environmental storing stuff that caught fire and exploded?
Hub recycling.
Correct. We did two things during that period. One was the investigation and the issue on syringes washing up on the beach. Our environmental prosecution investigation section found the reasons, wrote the law that was both passed statewide and federally. We got it adopted by the National Association of Attorneys General to be adopted in all the coast states, all directly out of that environmental investigative group that we had. That same group had, in North Bergen, had indicted the people in the hub, that was called, during our tenure. Bobby Carroll, as a matter of fact, was the head lawyer investigator on that, head lawyer on that case. And they were the people who were also storing the stuff under the bridge on 78. We eventually, 6-8 months after that, the trial went on for them. They were put in jail and prosecuted. So we made significant organized crime, significant environmental cases, which were successfully prosecuted. And it was done because we were working jointly. We forced, and it was like war, to get the state police at that point in time and the Division of Criminal Justice people to work together on cases. They fought with each other. Today they don't. I have to say that problem, particularly with the advent of the present superintendent that I participated in helping to choose, as a matter of fact,
Rick
Fuentes, who replaced Santiago, has finally implemented that program in spades, literally. He has put together a joint effort in law enforcement that we all prayed for and worked for in state government. I left executive orders when I left, and Clinton then kind of reversed or tried to reverse them after I left, about that working together process. We put a great division of criminal justice, but those are the issues that I was looking at when I made that decision. I knew I had a good prosecutor in Don Belsall. I had asked Don if he would stay, and he did, and became my first assistant. And
you toughened the drug laws of New Jersey.
I did.
20 years later, did you go too far?
Screaming success. The idea was not to, we knew law enforcement could never solve the drug problem. You probably, maybe you don't remember my speeches, but I've said that 1,000 times. The answer was in education and treatment and moving our facilities forward. Our drug-free schools program, and it was a screaming success. We had indisputable proof that the major sale point in most urban areas for all forms of drugs and narcotics and illicit chemicals was happening around schools and on school property and in schools. We set about a program to get drugs out of the school building and put educational programs in the school building. There were 29 substance abuse coordinators in various school districts in the state. Today there's 500.
You know what they say about the drug-free school zones today is that setting up a 1,000-foot perimeter around a school is too much, right, because anybody in an urban area who sells any kind of drug is probably standing within a school zone and faces an automatic prison sentence.
Exactly.
Do you agree with that criticism?
I do, and I supported the change in the law. Let me walk you back to 1987 when we passed that. If you remember, the dominant force in law enforcement was a senator by the name of Graves out of Patterson. Frank insisted, in order to pass the bill, that he get 1,000 feet because he wanted to encompass the whole city. And he did. And we compromised on that issue. We wanted 300 feet because we were aiming at the school building and the school property. He had a much bigger agenda. And at the time, he had a legitimate case. He was the mayor. Not only was he the state senator, he was the mayor of a city, Patterson. And he believed that if he had the right to arrest people within 1,000 feet, he could do significant things with his police force to help get drugs off corners and away from kids and away from his city. And did so, and successfully did so. But it requires a sustained effort. And the purpose, our purpose, was not that. That was his purpose. But we sold our purpose to him on that basis. And our purpose was to eliminate drugs from school hallways and grounds. We had surveillance cameras particularly in Passaic and some of our major cities. If you remember, we even put some state police undercover in the school systems during that period, so the world knew that we were enforcing those laws within the building, and we weren't fooling around with this. And frankly, it's worked. And it's one of the more prouder things I think that that came out of that whole effort was the educational programs, the substance abuse coordinators, and freed our schools of being the trading grounds for drugs and other things.
Let me shift gears a little bit. From the midpoint of the second term, looking backwards through 6 years of the Kane administration, what was the greatest defeat that you suffered?
Well, the defeat or thing we didn't accomplish.
Either one, however you want to take the question.
I got disappointed in the use of surplus on a personal basis, and I don't think we sustained the level of discipline on our fiscal plant to more precisely institutionalize it. And I think I've said this before, and Tom made a point during that period, and as I raised that, I said in the first term we took our extra dollars that when the economy did get better, and we spent them on one-time expenditures. They tended to get expended after that on ongoing programs. Tom says, how can I say no? I've got the dollars and I got kids suffering in schools. Don't I have to give it to them? And I said, we need to be more creative, I think. And so I think we missed that one. I think we could have been better and more creative on how we dealt with our educational programs all over the state. The advent of charter schools, I think we missed that. And dealing with a major, major change in our educational programs in our urban areas. Our system was designed in the Thorough and Efficient Education Act that Brendan passed at the time he passed the income tax to a monolithic system that tried to function the same way everywhere. But the kids weren't the same everywhere. The kids in urban areas are different than the kids in suburban areas. But it was dominated by a system from suburbia, not urban. And so you need an entirely different school system. You're dealing with different kids with different problems. And I think that there's a failure that we had. That's the failure. And I don't know that failure has been resolved since.
You're talking about the school,
the urban educational issue.
Okay.
We had not created a system. Now that I said this in my campaign in '93 that we need to take the kids where they are, not where we wish they were, and we need to create a system that really solved them. I.e., why not put boarding schools in all of our urban areas and make that, have them all the kids board, have their families participate, make it a community school in which the kids live in the school. It was good enough for Boys Town, and it was also good enough for the wealthy in our society. We know that system works. And if we can take those kids and deal with them with their families for a period of a generation, 17 years, will we not have broken the back of a lot of those educational problems? And we began to have the resources in the second term to perhaps address that. And I don't think it's been addressed to this day.
Let me shift gears again. How does the role... What do you want me to do?
Yeah, well, he or she be confident.
I would assume that that would be the public's choice, and when they deal with the governor,
but
did he
they're
pick a
choosing
good
the
thing?
governor.
For politics.
But did the governor, the person who is governed, and it's a debate even with Palin it was this past time, is it a good choice? And does it help you or hurt you?
He's looking at it from a political standpoint for his reelection.
I understand.
Not as a confident.
But the idea of going forward with a new program, I mean, for going forward with the same program as opposed to a Cody stepping in and completely changing everything, that makes a certain amount of sense.
Or Donnie DiFrancesco
Right.
is another example.
Right. Okay.
When I said that about our educational program,
Yeah.
let me put the other caveat on that. Our finest cabinet officer and what we did during those 8 years in education was absolutely outstanding. The fact that we missed that piece of it, there's so many great things we did get done in education that should not be overlooked in that scenario. And I do think Saul Cooperman was one of our most insightful education commissioners on a functional level, who did more on that functional level to enhance education. But the attacking of the issue I just described was something that no governor has had the intestinal fortitude to attack yet.
Let me shift gears again. How does the New Jersey Attorney General role compare to a similar position in other states?
Not even close. 43 of the states are elected attorneys general, not appointed. They don't have they don't have generally criminal justice enforcement powers. They are consumer advocates. You don't see the New Jersey Attorney General out on consumer issues at all, even though the Consumer Affairs Division is one of theirs. That's left to the director of the Division of Consumer Affairs. So it's an entirely different role. If you were to ask Ann Milgram, I've chatted with Ann a little bit about the National Association of Attorneys General, and she says, other than a couple of things, that doesn't fit us well. There's a criminal justice side that does, and there's about 7 attorneys general who have varying degrees of significant criminal justice enforcement. None anywhere near the level New Jersey does. New Jersey's Attorney General is an exact duplicate of the United States Attorney General from its powers, general structure and powers perspective. Very powerful position. It's a constitutional officer, can't be fired, only impeached. So we're willing to give the Attorney General's office significant criminal enforcement powers because it has those kind of protections in it.
A governor can't change attorneys general?
Nope.
That's by law, but how about
Constitution?
But how about in reality? Couldn't a governor who expressed no confidence in his attorney general force his attorney general out?
Could try to, yes. But an attorney general has a lot of tools in their arsenal as significant as the governor to combat that.
Has it happened?
Never. Even though they've been dissatisfied probably with some things attorneys generals do to them, they don't remove them, and because it's much too difficult to do. The other beauty of it, and George Cooler gets the credit for this, back when they created the modern Attorney General in 1970, the Criminal Justice Act of 1970 changed that structure. He took away partisan politics out of the Attorney General's office. Deputies used to be hired by political party, and it was a whole different world. It's a nonpartisan job, has been now for 38 years. The department itself prevents an Attorney General from abusing the position, believe it or not.
Does it?
Absolutely.
How?
They just have 100 ways of doing it. They're there on a bipartisan basis, nonpartisan basis, particularly the criminal justice side, more so than the civil sides. But even the civil division, they just don't function. They'll stop functioning. They'll submarine an attorney general who really tries to do something that is, they believe, wrong, corrupt, I would say, or any reasonable fact similar. Now, they will not challenge an attorney general on a policy basis, i.e. Irwin's move to change. They'll resign, that's one of their tools. if they don't agree with it. But that's different from what they do underneath.
So you're saying that if it appears that an attorney general is engaging in a political vendetta or conducting a politically tainted prosecution, that will be undermined by the staff, and
Yes.
therefore it never happens?
Absolutely. That's why you don't see it.
Okay.
It's amazing. I can't, and I watched it happen. I've watched it happen twice.
Anything you can go
No.
into? Okay.
But it's amazing. We have the best system. I said I thought the job was easy. The reason I thought the job was easy, I came from a job in which I had intimate understanding of the entire function, power structure, and functioning of state government. I think our best attorneys general in the modern era have been the John Degnans of the world, who came also from the counsel's job. John Farmer, also who came from the counsel's office. Because it gives you an incredible background to walk into the attorney general's job. The opposite is the case when you reach on the outside and you get a private lawyer who comes in. It's very difficult in a 4-year span for that lawyer, who operates in an entirely different environment, to function in the role of attorney general, because it is more administrative and policy than it is legal, although it has a whole legal piece to it. They always do the legal piece very well. They all analyze the cases, make good decisions, make good recommendations on the law, but they miss very often the rest of it. That a more experienced person in government, as a good lawyer or a great lawyer, would not make. We all have to know the law. And I've always considered myself I'm not known as a lawyer to any great degree, but I know what a real lawyer does and what their real value is. I was always very good at that. And I think the other people I've described, almost across the board, were all good lawyers. Irwin, not the Degnans, but the other appointees, were all great lawyers. They were not all good attorneys general in the sense of their capacity to run a very complex government institution that affects all the other institutions of government.
As Attorney General, you had a remarkably close relationship with the governor.
Yes.
Were you able to just deal with the governor, or did you have to go through the governor's staff as well?
I did both. I mean, most attorneys, well, the attorney generals I know, direct relationship with the governor is an important issue. The governor needs to know the status of the law, and the enforcement of its broad policies in a legal sense is very important. Or problems that he's facing in a legal sense need to be explained to him very profoundly. That's either done through the council, usually, or directly with the governor by most attorneys general. And most attorneys general have a direct relationship and capacity to get to the governor anytime they want. I didn't need to use it very often. I understood the policies of the administration. I was probably their biggest fan. So we weren't dealing with a lot of conflicts. I don't know that the staff was crazy about my independence in the job compared to the way I was when I was counsel, because I had a different role. I wasn't the governor's lawyer per se. I was the state's lawyer, and that had a different client, although the governor was one of those clients. So it was a different hat that I wore. And I had the independent ability, which he knew and said I could use without his concern, to use the bully pulpit. I did it on the drug issue, I did it on getting motor vehicles back up and running, and I did it on the criminal justice issues. By bringing the prosecutors in the state together, by trying to bring them together with the Division of Criminal Justice, with the rest of law enforcement. So I had a chance to act independently, and it was fun. The job was really fun.
You said last time that, I'm not sure I understand what this, you ask it. Go ahead.
Confuse the train. Cary, you said last time that Governor Kane shared the rather low view of lawyers.
Yes.
Now, as Attorney General, were there times when you gave him advice that he sort of carped about, saying that that was being too legal or too lawyerly or too technical?
The only good lawyer is a dead lawyer, was a Shakespeare saying. Tom had that on a little sign on his desk sometimes that he would take out when I would walk in the office as counsel. Forget the Attorney General side. And he was a non-lawyer, and he had the usual frustrations that non-lawyers have with lawyers and their issues, particularly when it conflicted with something a direction he wanted to go in. He was even more frustrated. But he was also a very insightful and significant debater in his own right, and his arguments were profound and well thought out, as good as many lawyers could put together, which is not always the case. And he had been around lawyers for so long, then dealing with them, that he understood it. So he also wasn't a golfer, and I was a golfer lawyer, and he was a tennis player, non-lawyer. So the humor over our differences in those regards were constantly being thrown in my face, I guess is the best way to describe it. I now have him playing golf once in a while, so it's since he got a little older.
Did the front office team change dramatically from first term to second term?
Yes.
You left?
You all left.
You all left.
Supreme Court position opened up. Gary Stein left about a year and a half and 2.5 years into the term. That was an option for me, I guess, at some point. I never wanted to do that. It was too monastic a job for me. I left at the end of the term. Greg Stevens left. The only person who stayed was Carl. Bob Grady left, went on ultimately to Bush, speechwriter for Bush, and ran Bush's OMB for a while. Bob is still a dominant force, I think, and still called upon regularly for his insight on political and governmental issues.
In New Jersey? I think
No,
he's in
nationally.
California.
No, he's in California now, yes. But nationally. And it's funny, I used to go down and visit him. We used to talk a lot. He took the OMB kind of world over for the same reasons I took the Attorney General's job, to see what it was like to not be on the policy side, but be on the implementing side. He was on the speech writing and political side, and he wanted to see what it was like to be on the policy side.
How did that?
Yes, we all moved on, and different people moved into those roles who had significantly different skills than we did.
Tell us more. Ed McGlynn was chief of staff.
Right.
Michael Cole was chief counsel.
Mike moved from first assistant at the AG's office and head of division of law to the counsel's job.
Brenda Davis took over policy and
planning.
planning, and Carl Golden stayed as
Same,
communications.
exactly.
As strong a team as first
Different
term?
team. We had an established system that was there. We weren't trying to build one. Different kind of personalities. People far more skilled at continuing something that we thought was, that Kane thought, I think, and we did too, thought was a pretty good system. And all very skilled people in continuing that. Michael is a great lawyer and a great policy lawyer. Did a great job. Followed by Debbie Ports, by the way, in the last year when I left. I recommended Debbie when Michael moved on. Ed McGlynn had been deputy chief of staff. He understood the functioning of the governor's office very well. And of course, Carl's Carl. Carl didn't change.
Talk about Carl a little bit.
Right.
As a newsman, I dealt with Carl,
Sure.
and he's a unique
talent
talent and character.
He is a unique talent and character.
What did he do for King?
He had a way, and Tom liked this, he had a way of, what was the theory that the press corps used to say? I used to do a lot of briefings for the press corps, whether it was budget or various others. And the story around the State House press corps was, if you ask Cary what time it is, he'll tell you how to build a clock. So when they needed somebody to explain something in detail, now I was very good at that. When they needed somebody to succinctly shrink it down into a quote, for which you and the press corps needs is to have limited space, Carl is second to none in being able to shrink that issue down to the right quote, which is a phrase or a sentence or a couple of sentences or a paragraph, than anyone I've ever seen. On any issue, if you give him a little information on it, and he doesn't want to get too clogged with too much of that information, he can shrink it down and make it very communicatable.
Often witty and...
I got some idea. Okay, I'm rolling again.
Carl's comments were often witty and acerbic.
Yes. And Tom liked his ability to shrink things down, though, and to communicate what he wanted to say in a very succinct way. And Carl's ability to do that, to take his concept, his position, and make it communicatable, sometimes with wit and sometimes a little acerbic, but it had the same impact. And no one I've ever met is as good as Carl Golan is at that, ever.
And Carl had gone way back with Kane, back into the assembly days.
Absolutely.
Where he was...
When I was in the assembly.
When you were in the assembly.
He was before me. He was with Tom in the assembly. And when I was in the assembly, he was the... he had a little bit of a spat, I think, with Jim Hurley, who was the leader at that time, and wound up losing his position as the Speaker for the Assembly Minority, and then picked up all the legislators individually as clients.
You painted quite a picture of the first term earlier in this session. Speaking in terms of the broad sweep, how was the second term?
Second term was as productive, but for different reasons. Tom was much more relaxed. He had the ability to reach out of the state. Tom had almost made a point of not leaving New Jersey during that first term. The issues were so profound. His need to understand government, state government, say as a governor, as an executive, was so significant in his own mind. He was so focused on learning that. I think he felt comfortable in the second term. And you'll notice he had a lot of trips to China. He did a lot of overseas work to try to promote New Jersey. Was not afraid to leave. He wasn't running for re-election, so it wasn't an election issue. And I think he was looking at promoting the state of New Jersey in a broader world, and also broadening his world governmentally, not just New Jersey, and understanding Washington better. I think he spent a lot of time doing that for New Jersey's benefit and for his own insight.
Did he have an interest in being the vice presidential candidate on the George H.W. Bush ticket in '88?
I know he was very excited about giving a keynote speech at the Republican convention, which he did. I think he was excited about the potential in his own life to move on to something different after he finished as governor, because we are limited to 2 terms. And I think something on the national or international field had some interest to him. But then he opted for the Drew position, and I think he really enjoyed the freedom that the Drew position gave him. And I think if something had come along that he really liked and wanted to do, he would have done it on a national basis.
He was, every 4 years, speculated about as running for U.S. Senate.
Right.
Or every time there was a Senate election, he was speculated about. And the conventional wisdom was that his wife, Debbie, never wanted to see him move to Washington. To what extent is that true or myth?
I think that's true, but I don't think that's the moving force. I think he made his own assessments also. He was one time very serious. I mean, he was almost a candidate once in that process. And a lot of us were urging him to do it. We thought he would, moving that skill level to the United States Senate, we thought would be absolutely...
Was that 1990, the year?
93, I think, 2-3.
Okay.
I think it was.
He wouldn't have run against
Bradley.
When
When Bradley didn't run, I think it was Bradley's
That
seat.
was 96 then.
Yeah, maybe it was before then. It was a seat before then. I don't remember what seat it was, but it was in the early 90s. And I know I talked to him at great length. I know a lot of his friends, like me, had urged him to try to seriously look at it. I think I know he was very concerned about the incredibly conservative nature of the Senate and Congress at the time on the Republican side, and was very concerned about not being a meaningful voice, but by being spending more time having to fight with his own party inside than actually accomplishing anything. He was older. He didn't want to waste the years he had remaining and have them not be productive. And I don't think he was ever convinced that he could make a real contribution in the Senate at the levels he would want to, and not just be an antagonist. He was not interested in being an antagonist. That, and I think the family demands when wanting him around were profound. Also, the opportunities as President Drew were very pressing on him. And running a university like Drew and what you can accomplish in that role, and he proved that with the 9/11 Commission later on. But in various other ways, I think that was the weight I think he was giving back at that time. And he decided not to run, I think for multiple reasons, as I understand it. And I don't know that I disagree with him on any of those as justification.
When did you start thinking about running for governor?
About 2 months before I resigned in '89. I was very concerned that the Republican candidates that were running didn't have the skill, concept, or capacity to implement what I had just put 7 or 8 years of my blood, sweat, and tears into. I mean, really, what we had done was so good, and it needed to continue. And I didn't see them having the ability to do it, whether it was, they have skills, but they weren't skills in the areas that I thought were going to continue that philosophy. It was Corder and Hardwick, and the only one that did potentially was Bill Gormley. Bill and I didn't disagree, but we heard each other in the race. And so I decided, and I wasn't finished. I told you, if I could have stayed as Attorney General for another 2 or 3 years, if Tom had one more term, you never would have seen me run for public office, I don't think. I didn't think Jim Floyer would take us in the right direction. And I don't dislike Jim. Jim's a very committed government public servant. Always has been. And no one should ever take that away. I didn't like his judgments and his decisions and his direction. So you put those two pieces together, and I said, let me jump into this race. I was very frustrated. As it turned out, Bill and I garnered the moderate vote, and Corder had a solid base. And as I was sure of, the conservative in New Jersey was a weak candidate. And so the only people that had a chance to win and continue that record were either Bill or myself. And Bill couldn't win, in my opinion. He was too regional.
Is that a bitter experience?
No, I don't think that was as bitter as the '93 race was. Much more. That was frustrating, is the way to describe it, but not bitter.
Who were your key campaign people in '89?
Oh, some crew I put together that was a bunch of amateurs, really. Larry Paporo, who has been around a little bit, had been around, and some local people. We had a polling consultant out of Washington and a consultant, but it was something that was put together on a wing and a prayer, because it was done at the last minute. There was not a lot of, I know the world thinks there was a lot of, I was doing all kinds of things to structure to do that. But
the world did think that.
I know they did, and I can't change
You were so
that.
high profile as Attorney
Right.
General that people said he's campaigning for something.
Exactly. I know that, and I guess Chris Christie faces that a little bit now, but it wasn't for me. It really wasn't. It really was the programs. And I always knew I had, there was something missing in my ability to communicate to a large constituency, like a state, on a statewide race. And that is, I talk too much. I don't have that capacity that Carl Golden did to make the quotable quote. I don't have the capacity to stay on message. I almost know too much and have a never-ending need to explain it to people. And I knew that about myself. I also knew that I had a great deal of experience that I thought would be very valuable. to have a governor that had the background that I had managed to accumulate, both in local, county government, legislative, governor's office, and executive experience, to bring to the table that I thought would be very valuable. So.
Governor Kane was in a difficult position in '89 when 5 of his friends. Who was the 5th? There was a 5th.
Well, it was. I don't know that Hardwick or Cardinale were his friends.
Cardinale. Okay.
Right, I don't
okay.
think
Cardinale was the 5th.
I don't know. I think I was, and Bill and Corder were.
So what did he do?
Nothing.
And how did that make you feel?
A little abandoned, I guess, to be honest with you. But that was Tom's right. He was in a difficult position. What does he do? Particularly Bill and myself. Bill Gormley had been an avid supporter of Tom's and a very dependable one through 8 years. We did put together with the Burn People the Open Primary Act. We did a lot more from a campaign perspective to get him elected originally. And Bill did a tremendous amount as a legislator and as a legislative leader to support him. So it was a tough position to be in.
So you understood Kane's neutrality?
Yeah, I understood it. I don't know if I liked it, but I understood it, and I understood a lot of the other dynamics that were at work at that point. He was still the sitting governor. He had to deal with the future of the state. There was a whole world in Washington that was supporting Corder that were also friends of his. That he was working. We had a lot of issues pending. It was hard to describe it at the time, but there was a major welfare reform program that Drew Altman had put together in '87 and '88 that revolutionized the welfare system in this country. That was at stake at that particular point in time. So there was a lot of other issues on the table that are very difficult for other people to know, including my own family, who doesn't understand. But I did, and.
What do you mean? What doesn't your family understand?
Well, where was the governor? I mean, from their perspective, I died for him, literally. And so they had difficulty dealing with his lack of support in '89.
What do you remember anecdotally about that '89 campaign? Any scene or event spring to mind?
No, just my argument with Bill Gormley about why he should be out of the race. And only one of us could win. And Bill and I were friends.
You knew this ahead of time.
Yes.
This is not analysis, hindsight.
I may not be as good at implementing politics, but I understand it. And I understand the dynamics of it and the strategies. And I knew that Bill and I couldn't win, and I knew he couldn't win on his own. You
had that conversation with him?
Yes, yeah, I did.
You remember where and when?
Oh, it was during the campaign. I think it was on the phone. But Bill and I knew each other. I mean, we were in the legislature together. We were sworn in the same time. We're both Catholics. We're exactly the same age. We went to Catholic colleges. I mean, we're walking down the same path for a lot of years. He's a little more dramatic than I am, I guess is the best way to describe him, and dynamic in many ways. But we've been friends for a very long time, so it was not difficult for me to raise that issue with him. But Bill very badly thought he needed to lose a race to win a race, and that was his theory at the time, and he did it. I said, I got a chance against 3 or 4 conservatives, but if you're going to split away the rest of the moderate vote, I'm in trouble.
And you, in turn, lost the race only to try again in '93, and you say that's a rougher memory than '89.
I ran from nowhere. I know everybody thinks I was setting up to run, but I wasn't. And I organized a campaign in January. The primary was in June. I went from 5th to 2nd, and a pretty close 2nd to Corder. And I was convinced that I had a lot to offer, and that if I could get a fair race, and I thought I had more to offer than Christie did. Christie Whitman in '93, and that experience I thought was much more profound, and that I would do a better job than she would. And I think I would have, as I said, I would have run the race, but for Woolworth's bizarre insertion in South Jersey.
You said that off camera. Tell us about that on camera.
Well, he raised enough dollars to get matching money of some significance that he put 95, 98% of it in the Philadelphia media market. And the South Jersey votes are far more conservative. My polling showed that Christie Whitman was running a bad fourth down there. I was first. And when he put his money into that race as a far-right conservative businessman, blow up Trenton, I lost. I came in second in South Jersey, which I think was enough to turn the race.
He was a former state senator.
Yes.
Very conservative from Essex
Very good West
County.
Point graduate, and a very, 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 very right-wing fiscal conservative.
From our earlier conversation, I got the sense that you felt there may have been some collusion between Whitman and Woolworth to deny you South Jersey.
Well, if it was, I think it was brilliant. I don't know that it was. I have no proof that it was. But why would he spend all his money in South Jersey? He couldn't win the election by winning South Jersey. He couldn't get enough votes. And maybe he wanted to make a statement. Maybe that's all he wanted to do. And that's perfectly all right, too. Either way, that was the reason I think I lost, and I would have won the South Jersey votes. Even with my propensity for verbosity.
And you now serve the state on the State Commission of Investigation.
Yes, I had bypass surgery in 96, 97. I had just finished a commission on, as chairman of the commission, reviewing the viability of the SCI. There was a big fight about its continuation in that mid-90s when Christie was governor. I had just was coming off bypass surgery, and she appointed me to the commission to try to see if it had been reinstated, that issue was over, and to see if I could help put Humpty Dumpty back together again, which we successfully did. And I've now been on the commission since 97, and I'm serving my last 2.5 years right now. And I've been chairman, I was appointed chairman by Dick Cody.
And is the commission a healthy state agency at this point?
Very healthy state agency, and we've significantly modified the philosophies of the SCI. Not only do we have it on a sound fiscal ground, we have a great staff, but our statute requires us not only to do investigations, but to make recommendations. And the SCI historically has done casual look at recommendations. And we were more of a gotcha agency. We're trying to get away from a gotcha agency to one that points out fallacies, faults, problems, and puts as much resources into our recommendations and to see our recommendations implemented so that our recommendations are serious, well thought out, well researched. And the last 5 years, 4 or 5 years since we've been doing this, we've gotten an incredible response from both the legislature and the governor on the implementation of our recommendations. So that our investigations systemically matter to point out problems, but our recommendations now are in fact being implemented. And it's allowed me, as you can clearly see, Michael, I haven't lost my propensity for public service or public policy. The SCI has allowed me to continue to operate in both that law enforcement world, which I have a lot of experience in, and the public policy world. So I'm able to look at issues and problems and try to recommend real solutions. And with this, not just gotcha, but fix-it piece of it, we're able to have an impact on the public policy in the future of New Jersey, and that's very satisfying to me, personally.
You've seen state government now from many different vantage points for a long time.
Long time.
What's right and what's wrong with New Jersey state government today?
For a significant period of time, going back, I think, in the end of the Whitman term, through McGreevey and through today, the state's functional operation has materially suffered. Budgetarily, its ability to address problems consistently has significantly suffered. It's too partisan. It's not bipartisan enough. Some of the philosophies that Obama's been talking about, I said I was very proud of those years with Kane that we did, don't exist. there's an animosity that exists. Well, my biggest fear is that you're not there anymore. I don't mean you personally, but the press corps. There's nobody really watching state government as the press capacity diminishes that it has over the last few years. And so that fourth branch of government, the press corps, its profound impact on state government has been waning for 15 or 20 years and continues to do so. And that spells disaster for the future. It only makes partisanship worse. The other thing that I'm most disturbed about is that no longer are the elected officials dominating the scene, but the people who get them elected are dominating the scene. And that's something we created in the Byrne and the Cahill, Byrne, Kane years and Florio years that made them independent, an independent player that allowed for that and demanded that compromise.
We're more boss-driven today than we were 30 years ago?
Yes. We're back to where we were maybe the 50s and 60s. And that's not a good thing at all.
And finally, how should we regard Tom Kane for the sake of posterity?
I think if she's going to look at the Kane administration years, the finest we've had in this decade. The only ones I would broadly compare them to would be the Hughes years, if I had to make a comparison. I think Governor Hughes was a brilliant governor. Tom Kane was his administration, and he brought out the best concepts and ideas in government service and solutions that I've ever seen anybody bring out. All the cabinet people, the ideas, the democratic ideas that he was, I don't want to say neutral ego because he's not a neutral ego person, but his ability to put his own ego aside for the public good and his commitment to the public good, I think have made him one of the finest governors the state will have ever had.
Very good, Cary. Thanks very much.
My pleasure.
Okay.
My pleasure.